want to start by just saying, I think it was in November I was having coffee with a friend of mine who is a member of our church, woman about my age, late 40s, single woman, lives in an apartment, works for an elder services agency, and she was telling me, man, this is of course in November, even maybe late October, she's sort of feeling the sand shifting under her. She said, I'm not sure I'm going to have a job in a couple of months. I feel like, you know, both the charity sector and the state are going to pull the rug out from under elder services, and you know, I'm not really, you know, sure if I'm going to be able to find a job in that field, and I'm you know, worried about whether I'm going to be able to keep my apartment. And you know, in the course of that conversation, I said to her, in a kind of offhanded way at first, I said, well, Edith, you know, you can always come live with us. And she looked at me and started to cry. And I said, well, it's true. You can come live with Tricia, and Nora and I, we're not going to let you go without a place to live. And she started sobbing harder and harder. And I realized so many people, one step away, are feeling the sand shifting and the deep, deep anxiety. And later, I saw her a couple weeks later in the week. She said, I'm a little embarrassed about when I was crying. I said, well, that's okay. I said, what was happening for you? She said, at that moment, I felt like I was being held by my community, that you wouldn't let me fall. And to me, I think that is the image, if you will, for this work. The work of stewardship is, how do we create institutions, communities that hold one another, particularly in the most difficult times. I think we're good at it for the short-term emergencies, like somebody's family member is ill, or you need the casserole posse to move into action when somebody's in the hospital. But what about if there's a sustained economic downturn? And with that, I was struck by there's a journalist in Boston who did a really interesting article called Depression 2009. And he said, you know, when people think about depression in the 1930s, they have these images of people sort of coming together and sewing circles and block parties and rent parties and stopping the evictions. And he says, you know, things have really dramatically changed. An economic downturn today will be characterized largely by, in his words, social isolation. And the image that he had was of neighborhoods. As we've evolved over the last 60, 70 years, we've become more dispersed. We're living further and further apart in suburbia and exurbia, and that the neighborhood, after a severe economic downturn these days, is going to have an empty house sitting next to an overcrowded house, next to an empty house, family members coming home, or parents coming home and living over the garage. And this was the image that Drake thought would characterize a depression today. So how did we get here? And let me take I'm going to spend some time sort of talking more about the sort of pastoral and congregational response, this mini movement of common security clubs. But I want to do a little bit of a sideline just to say, how did we get here? And I think it's important, I find, to remind ourselves that this economic crisis is not a weather event. It's a human-created disaster. It could have been prevented. The poverty rates, the unemployment, the vanishing savings, the eroding sense of job security could have been prevented. Even the president, in his talk, uses the word recovery. And I think that's tricky, because I think we're heading into a period that doesn't look like anything we've known. We're not going back to the economy of 2006 or 1996 or 1956. We're just not going back. We really have to come to grips with the fact that we had an economy for 30 years that was based on debt and consumer spending that was based on borrowing, not based on wages going up. 30 years. And a declining, plummeting savings rate. And a level of borrowing that we have never seen in the last century. We actually realize there is this new story. We have this opportunity to tell a different story, where we help each other remind one another what it is that we have. And stewardship then becomes a question, not only how do we sustain our institution, but how do we prepare ourselves and our communities and our congregation for the economic and ecological changes ahead. And let me say that for me, to me, that is the question that has in some ways galvanized our congregation. How do we prepare ourselves for the changes ahead? What is our church for if we can't be a place where we chart that territory together? I want to share a little bit about this Common Security Club approach. Many of you have done small group ministry. Many of you have done parts of the work of Common Security Clubs. It's one of the ways that people are preparing. What's beautiful about it, for first, is it's people getting together. It's reviving the notion of the face-to-face meeting. We can certainly use the social technologies, the Facebooks and stuff, to find one another and get together, but there's no substitute for breaking bread together. And so these Common Security Clubs, I'll say a little bit about how they work, and I'll talk a little bit more even later about it. But they have basically three purposes: learn together, mutual aid, and social action. And many of our congregations have each of those dimensions. We have study groups and book groups, opportunities for people to learn together. We do mutual aid. We help one another out. And we do social action. But the idea of the Common Security Club is to try to do them in a kind of integrated way. Essentially, and I can say at our church, our Common Security Club formed in January. There are about 18 of us. We've met together for 6 months now. And we recognize that there's a lot to learn. We sort of felt like we were sleepwalking the last couple of years in terms of what was happening in the economy, what was happening in terms of the changing ecology. So let's come together to learn. It's not a one-time forum or seminar. We really need to sort of commit to an ongoing process of learning together. And that's included watching videos, reading articles, organizing forums for ourselves and the congregation and the community. The other function is mutual aid. And here it takes a variety of forms. It's everything from people sort of saying what it is that they need and what it is they have to offer and sharing that. We have most Common Security Clubs start with a potluck, which if you, I know about your potlucks, but our potlucks, it's sort of, you do have this momentary revelation of abundance. Wow, I just brought this and I can't stop eating. So some of the mutual aid takes the form of people working to get out of debt, making kind of get out of debt support groups, pacts together, helping think through budgeting, how to cut expenses. We've done a mutual aid weatherization parties in the Northeast. We have a lot of leaky houses. And so we did sort of round-robin weatherization parties in some of the Common Security Clubs as a way to immediately help people save money. And it was great because some people had carpentry skills or were willing to climb up in attics and help insulate, and others could do weather stripping on doors. And we just moved from house to house over a couple weekends, and did that. And it's obviously enormous. All these things are enormously community building as well as practical in terms of saving money. Some groups have actually had rent parties. You ever thought of that? Or mortgage party? You can't meet the rent, can't meet the mortgage. Get the neighbors together, organize a party, have a bucket, raise the rent. It's obviously not a long-term solution to your mortgage, or rent, but again, it was an example borrowed from a previous generation of people who came together. As trust grows, people form, can do deeper support groups. Our Common Security Club at our church, we now do what we sort of call makeovers. Somebody can say, I'd like time, and they have a particular problem. They're unemployed and they want to think through a business idea, or they're not able to meet pay their bills, and they kind of come and bring their budget, and people brainstorm. And this is not a charity model. This is not like 5 people helping another 5 people. There's a real culture of mutuality. And as trust grows, there's really clearly all kinds of things that people can do together. And at the same time, it's pretty clear that there's certain things we can't do for each other. We can't become a national health insurance policy for each other. We can't become a bank for one another. We can't become a green energy program. There's things that we have to do, come together and do social action of various kinds. And so some of the common security clubs were active, pressing for the green energy or the stimulus bill. Some of them are actively involved in neighborhood efforts around evictions and trying to get foreclosure moratoriums. And this is because somebody in the club is going to lose their house, or they're a tenant in an apartment building that's under foreclosure. So that's just an example of some of the kinds of things that people are doing as they come together in these common security clubs. But I did want to just share a couple of what I think of are some of the lessons of this effort. One is it is enough for people just to come together, if you think about it. So one of the lessons is just by putting attention and energy into people coming together to talk to one another about the economic stories of their lives, that is in and of itself an enormous value. That even now, there's a story of the economic crisis is touching a lot of people. Many, many people still feel a sense of individual shame and isolation, and that they should have figured this out on their own, and they made a mistake, and it's all about individual failing. And I think that so convening the group, having the discussion, and I think that's the other revelation is our mutual aid muscles are really out of shape. And in some ways it's good to start with small things that where people can practice giving and receiving. But that's one of the value, one of the real lessons of these common security clubs. You start to do skills exchanges and start to keep track of how many people are donating hours and receiving benefits or doing skill swaps and that sort of thing. And everybody, it's sort of like a massive practice in how to support one another. And again, the personal relationships that are formed through that are fabulous. So one of the cool things in the skill exchange is when some of the women in our group said, well, we know how to do canning. And all the younger people were like, you do? We want to be there. I think the other lesson is we start to see all that's there. We start to see the Commonwealth, the commons, the abundance. And that's part of our old story. The old story is all wealth is private. And what we don't realize is really there's this enormous Commonwealth. There's these social networks, and there are things that we hold together that can sustain us. One final lesson, and a number of the common security clubs have lifted this up and said that one of the best things about coming together is they feel like they have a reality support group. It's sort of like as the news is on and they're hearing all this chatter about green sprouts and the economy is going to rebound. There's a group of people who have come together to really study and thoughtfully discuss the evidence that's out there and just try to keep focused on what's really happening. So in conclusion, let me say, I think that one of the things we found as we do this work is if we do this right, our communities will be stronger, our congregations will be stronger, we will be healthier, and the quality of our lives will be better. Thank you.